Welcome to the Writer Reads Short Stories. This is Earth and Lunar Dreaming, Part 4. Yes. Then of course I have a secure line. This way. Chitin ignored the way Tally was looking from one to the other of them and let Stella take him through the living room and into a shielded communications center built between the back wall of the shower and the pumping station for the water feature. I'll stay, she said, if you don't mind. You know what Odyssey is? Stella nodded. Okay then, the risk is yours. The blonde woman was waiting when he called back. She glanced down at her console and then past it to another part of the room. We'll trace this eventually, was all she said. Where's the girl? You found my computer. The woman hesitated, then nodded. I will not surrender the child if she does not want to go. At his words, Tally came around to stand beside him. I have no parents, she said. We know. We're going to return you to the home. We're not, Tally blurted, and Chitin looked at Stella in surprise. The woman on the screen looked just as startled. Stella tapped her temple and pointed to Tally. Chitin raised his eyebrows and glanced down at the child and the screen. The exchange had not gone unnoticed. You should tell whoever is with you that we'll eventually find them, so they might as well come into shot. Chitin looked at Stella and shook his head. I don't think so. This call is a favor. He changed the subject. What do you want with my girl? Yours? I am her protection, Chitin said. We have an arrangement. We were going to raise her ourselves. Chitin glanced down at Tally, who nodded. The woman sighed. And now you see why. Well, she's mine. You can't have her unless she wants to go. May I speak with her? Chitin glanced down at Tally, who nodded again, so he stepped back and let her take the seat. As a recruiting spiel, it was good, augmented with all the right sights, sounds, and promises an abandoned child could want. When she was finished, Tally looked at Stella and then at Chitin. He shrugged, keeping his expression as blank as he could. It's a good offer, he said. I can't match it. Tally looked at Stella, but Stella shook her head. No, Tally said when she looked back at the screen, and then she stood up and hugged his arm. To say the Odyssey agent was surprised was an understatement, and she looked unimpressed when she turned her attention to Chitin. You're sworn to protect her, are you? Chitin nodded. And to raise her? Again, Chitin nodded, although he was sure he could hear Tally calling him a liar. And you would do all within your power to retrieve her. That last was a statement of fact. Chitin nodded once more. He had sworn to protect the child, and that made Tally part of his pack. Your background checks were interesting, and given what you are, I'm authorized to make you her legal guardian. Nev will have the paperwork. The offer is open for the next standard lunar hour. The communications set beat, and Stella reached down and pulled the plug. They breached the first layer on their trace, she said. Chitin looked at her. There are 10 layers. 9 is never enough. When he kept staring at her, she explained, As you guessed, plants are not my first profession. Chitin stared at her for 3 more steady heartbeats and then crouched down, disengaging Tally's arm and turning her to face him. I've just said I'll adopt you, he said. Is that okay? Tally nodded, and he looked at Stella. Want to help me raise a cub? He asked, and Tally burst into tears. Without thinking, Chitin reached out and pulled her into his arms. What's wrong? He asked, brushing Tally's hair out of her eyes. What's wrong? I'm not a cub, the girl exclaimed. I'm a little girl. I'm a little human girl. Chitin placed his hand on each of her shoulders and looked into her face. Once again he noted her hair and the odd shading of her eyes. You're not, you know, he said, and didn't let go when she tried to twist away. Look into my head. Just look, and you'll know. Tally just held out her arms, and Chitin pulled her close, holding her as she cried. When she stopped, she pulled back enough to look him in the eye. I really want to be a little human girl, she said, and Chitin felt his heart start to break. But she leant forward and placed her head against his, and then rubbed her face against his cheek in a very cat-like gesture. For a moment her form wavered, and then it solidified, and then wavered again. Chitin caught a glimpse of a black tufted tail, felt bones almost shift, and then she remained firmly in the form he knew. Drawing a deep breath, she stepped out of his arms and looked him in the eye. I know what I am, she said, and you can look after me. I will be part of your pack. She looked at Stella. And you can look after me too. A pack needs more than two. I. Stella looked at Chitin and then at Tally, and her voice firmed. Yes. Chitin glanced around, and Stella looked down at the timepiece on her wrist. If we hurry, we can make it. I'll need to sign as well. I'm coming too, Tally said, and walked out the door before either of them could say no. Odyssey was waiting when they walked through the back door of Nev's shop and into his office. The blonde woman was sitting behind Nev's desk, and Matt was stationed by the door leading out into the shop front. My name is Amelia Delight, the woman said, and I'm authorized to approve the adoption of one Talienta Shift by one Chitin Larimo del Chester. She glanced over at Stella and raised an eyebrow. Huh, I thought that security layer looked familiar, she added. And exactly how are you involved? I believe I am the other half of the adoption partnership. The smile that touched Delight's lips was so fleeting Chitin thought he'd imagined it. But she pushed aside any personal amusement and took them through the paperwork with a businesslike manner, adding Stella's name where it was needed and initialing as they went. When they were done, Delight turned to Tally. You keep them in line, little cub, and no more side tricks until you've had some training. Training? Both Chitin and Stella laid one arm across Tally's shoulders, and Chitin swore he wouldn't ask Stella where she'd obtained her Tekka 92 if she did him the same courtesy about the Sheston 38 he'd pulled from the small of his back. Delight laughed and turned to the tiger. Happy now? Matt gave a coughing grunt of assent. Better give him the title then. I like what's in that notebook. Delight indicated another sheaf of papers on the desk. We understand raising a child is difficult, and we've seen your ideas for the dome. Chitin felt himself go crimson. You hacked my computer, he sputtered, outrage warring with fear of condemnation. Stella laid a hand on his arm to calm him, while Tally looked from one to the other in sudden fierce joy. Yes, she said, and Delight looked at her with a frown. Young lady, she said, her glare getting deeper when Tally grinned unrepentantly back. If you do not keep your grubby little paws out of my head, I will put a psychic lock on you that only deactivates in a classroom. Mr. Del Shasta, these are the title deeds to the dome and a small portion of the warren, and here, she said, adding more paperwork to the pile, are permits for a number of species you've named in your report. She turned her attention to Stella. You'll find the paperwork you need for your garden in your office, she said, and it was Stella's turn to look impressed. That was quick. We are Odyssey, Amelia told her. Once we had you on the feed, it wasn't hard to do the rest. You should know that. And shortly afterwards, they were gone. That evening, Chitin, Stella, and Tally stood under the abandoned expanse of the dome, looking out at the recovering earth. Not one of them said a word, but their hearts were full of hope, their spirits fueled by the dreams dancing in their heads, and the strangest feeling that they had finally made it home.